Calvin Ridley, I mean, you can see the ADP rise there
Oh
from
yeah,
May all the way to now. It's just
we apologize.
it's just absolutely taken off. And I think some people find this quite a divisive one because people say, okay, well, he's barely played in 2 years. But it really wasn't that long ago where he was like a top three dynasty wide receiver. You know, he had an injury hit 2021 and never really got it going. And then, of course, the unfortunate gambling suspension. But do you think that he's into a point where now we see that he's like 23.9 on Underdog, which is over
Second
a
round pick.
round? Yeah, which is second round pick. It's over a round ahead of sleeper ADP.
Yeah.
Do you feel he's undervalued on both, or do you feel like perhaps the sleeper ADP is perhaps where it should be a little more?
This is where your fantasy brain to me gets put in a blender because you know this early on this summer when Calvin Ridley was what, a fourth round pick, maybe even later than that. It was so easy to smash because the Jaguars last year had this, despite being awesome in the second half of the season, the ceiling put on their offense. I mean, Trevor was 18th in percentage of his pass attempts that traveled 20 plus yards on the field. And then you bring in Calvin Ridley, who unlocks all of that. I mean, this sounds like a long time ago, but back in 2020, he led the NFL in 20 plus yard targets. And then immediately during OTAs and training camp, I hear from people, you can read it in, John Shipley's beat writings and covering of the practices, that he just looks different than every other wide receiver out there. And then that's the reason he goes up, and we see it on the field too, up to 24 overall. But
Yes.
is that just too far, Tom? Like we get to this point where, hey, in my brain, I can easily make the case for Calvin Ridley over and over and over again to unlock this team. However, now he's being drafted around certified studs. He's bookended by Devontae Smith and T. Higgins, where you really can't poke holes in their profiles at all. And you can pretty easily do that for Calvin Ridley.
I think it's an easier click in best ball in some ways because so much of best ball we're looking for ceiling outcomes, and I think that's why his ADP, when we go back to this slide, you can see it's 42.2 on half PPR sleeper, but it's playing scared a bit. I think people are afraid of shooting for the moon in redraft, whereas in best ball we're always looking for those ceiling outcomes and looking for those players who can give us those complete ceiling outcomes. So I definitely understand why some people have hesitancy. I mean, we just saw Deshaun Watson come back from a long period off the field and look absolutely terrible. But Calvin Ridley had a far better offseason this year than Deshaun Watson had last year. There's no question about that. And I feel like everything's setting up for him to go out there and do well. And his usage in preseason, he's out there straight away. They don't seem to be holding him back. They seem quite happy. And yeah, I think it was a much easier pick when he was in the third round and the fourth round. But for now, I'm still chasing that kind of upside. And upside definitely ties it. Sorry, go on, Josh.
So are you taking him over T. Higgins? Are you taking him over DK Metcalf? Are you taking him over, some of the other wide receivers in that area, like obviously Amari Cooper and Deebo Samuel? That's much easier too. But like once he crossed that T tier, it gets a little concerning to me.
It does, yeah. I mean, for me, T. Higgins is somebody who I've not been as aggressive with this year. I think you look back at how much of a dominant target hog Jamar Chase was after he returned from his hip injury. He had double-digit targets in practically every game, even through the playoffs to a point. And DK Metcalf is somebody that largely I've been more interested in Tyler Lockett and JSN because I feel like they are more undervalued, whereas DK Metcalf is going ahead of where he returned value on last year. So it's kind of a combination of all those. But now, if Calvin Ridley had been at this point for the entire offseason, I think he's the kind of player that I'd probably only be at about 10% exposure across,
Right.
100, 200 drafts on, as opposed to because we were able to get the dip earlier on in the off season as such and get him at this lower value when he was such an easy click. I don't mind being at sort of 15% exposure to him.
Couple of points. One, so glad that you're including other ADPs in this. Hayden and I right now are going through all these other platforms, and we call them cheat code videos of comparing, ADPs in other platforms versus underdogs, and Calvin Ridley is going to be ranked way later on any default rankings or default ADPs wherever your home leagues are. We just did Yahoo and it was absurdly late, so it's easy to get him in your home leagues. The other part of this, and it goes down to what you're saying in playing in 2 wide receiver sets, this is a huge impact on Christian Kirk. Like, there is an alpha on this team now. I don't know if you've already had this conversation, but Christian Kirk was targeted on 21.5% of his routes. That was 36th among all wideouts last year. He was 32nd in yards per route run. And so this is a team that not only has Evan Ingram at tight end, they brought in Britton Strange, they brought in another tight end too, that I think we see more, and sure, they're probably going to, because it's their best personnel grouping, have the vast majority of their snaps in 11 personnel, but we'll see it mix and match quite a bit. I've even heard of some Tank Bigsby, Travis Etienne stuff near the goal line. But that severely hampers Christian Kirk. And I think he was going as like wide receiver 28. I'm totally out on that price tag right now.
Yeah, very much. That's kind of how I've been dealing with it. I feel like I don't mind taking Christian Kirk when he slips more than 6 spots past ADP, but for the minute, it just feels like a very difficult click in an area of a draft where I'm looking for kind of better outcomes. And